What is a family secret that you never knew of as a kid? My grandfather, who died in 2001, cheated on my grandmother. A lot apparently. My grandma knew this, but she still stayed with him just for his money basically. My grandfather owned a company, so he had quite a lot. Divorce rates back then were extremely low compared to nowadays. I think it's because a lot of women couldn't just get up and leave and be able to support themselves on their own. It's different now though. Yeah, that may be true, but that was probably not why she stayed with him. My grandma already divorced her first husband back in like 1970. Not my family, but I've been going out with a guy for the past months. We met online, so I jokingly told him I would Google him to make sure he wasn't a criminal. I found his name and ID number and address. I found his mother and father, what school he went to, and so on. I found a document stating the inheritance of his grandfather, and it said it was given to his spouse A, to his kids B, C, D and E. I told him, "Oh, your dad has 3 siblings." He said he only had 2. I gave him the names. He didn't recognize who he was. I am sure it's just a beloved distant cousin. He says there's no such name in his family. I have a secret uncle. Oh. Okay. That means my grandfather cheated on my grandma. Oh. Okay. I wonder if my dad knows about this. I'll ask him. No. I won't. With time, he told his cousin. She didn't know about it. They Googled him. It looked just like their grandpa. They found out vaguely where he lived, what he did for a living. He has a daughter. I don't know if they're gonna keep digging, but big ups. My uncle is apparently a mid-level criminal in my country. As a kid I always noticed when he disappeared for weeks on end, but the story my fam gave me was that he was a long-haul truck driver, which made sense since my grandfather does that. It wasn't until I was 19 that I got the whole story. Do you know what kind of crimes he committed? Alcohol smuggling. Booze is a no-no in my country of origin. Do you live in the Middle East? I hear they have serious laws against alcohol over there. I don't. He does, and yeah, if he ever gets caught, which he probably will eventually, his life's pretty much over. My great-grandfather was essentially on death row for his involvement with the IRA. Snuck out of Ireland and made it to the US like a year or 2 before my grandma was born. I could not exist if he got caught. A distant uncle of mine, he was my mom's stepbrother, is a multi-millionaire from growing and selling marijuana illegally. He lives in a small home in Maine and drives a 2009 Prius. I would have never expected it. My great-great-aunt murdered her parents with an axe. Before Grandpa married my grandma, he was very briefly married to a woman known to history as Miss Floozy Shoes. They were about 16. The marriage was annulled. Great-aunt had connections with the Dixie Mafia. I always wondered why everyone said not to screw with her, because she was such a nice old lady and always helped us if we had any kind of problems growing up. Back in 1975 I kind of figured out something was up when I got stopped in a small one-cop town and was going to be arrested for DUI even though I didn't have any alcohol and had not been drinking. Anyway, he told me I could make a call, and since my parents were out of town I called my aunt. She was there in about 30 minutes, walked in, told the cop to let me go or he was dead. About that time he got a phone call and the dude kind of paled out, hung up and told me I could leave and then apologized to my aunt. That's badass. I wish my aunt was like that. My grandfather died when my dad was 14. From alcoholism. His wife, my grandmother, died a year or 2 later. They said she died of a broken heart. But really she was an alcoholic too. Probably to cope with the nightmare that was my drunk grandfather. After my parents got a divorce in the 70s, my 2 sisters would constantly argue about which parent was their favorite. When it came to 5-year-old me, they always said, "You know you were a mistake, right?" So, I came to talk it up as an oopsie-daisy pregnancy, and I was a pleasant surprise to my parents, right? Wrong. My father took no interest in me whatsoever, until I started making six figures at 28 years old. No pitching the ball, he'd take my sisters on vacations and wouldn't take me. When we visited him, I had to sleep in an unheated camper, even though he had rooms. After my father passed from cancer, it came up again, "You know you're a mistake, right?" I said, "Yep, I must have been a pleasant surprise." My mother told me no, I was truly a mistake. She got pregnant, my dad was furious with her. When I went to my christening, several friends remarked what a cute baby I was. "Dad, he was a mistake, I didn't want him." This was repeated around town, especially at the country club, where he went to get hammered. Funny thing about my dad was, he had university athletes living in his house, his apartments, rent-free, and always seemed to help these guys out and definitely ridiculed me in front of them. I loved my dad, but I also hated him. Confusing. Was he really your father? Definitely my father. My mother was super prude and very religious, in a good way. We lived in a town of about 15,000 and everyone was always minding others' business. My mother received several calls from friends about my dad's shenanigans with local college girls. In summation, I was the cause of their divorce, eventually. My dad beat my mom, cheated on her, and was drunk. He was very controlling and eventually drove my mother to a near-successful suicide attempt, then he dumped her and we grew up poor. I think over the years, he began blaming me for their failed marriage, and also knew he f***ed up, and somehow this was my fault, or maybe what I symbolized to him. Regardless, I got PTSD, anxiety, and depression out of the deal. Also mildly bipolar, lots of bad feeling and angry feelings about the neglect and abuse, and trust me, when you are 5 and all this is happening and treated that way, you very quickly come to the conclusion you are a piece of shit and everything is your fault, which leads to deeply seated self-hatred. There is a silver lining. As a 5-year-old, I can remember crying myself to sleep, and swearing I would never behave like my dad if I got married and had kids. Well, I met a girl at 19 and we've been together for 35 years. We have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, 28 and 25. While I'm not perfect, my mistreatment as a child caused me not to be like him. Postscript, my dad tried to talk me out of getting serious with her. I remember my reply, "You know what, Dad, with all the fuck-ups, bad relationships with women, divorces you've had, you are the last person I would ever take advice from on relationships." He cocked his arm back to punch me. He did this a lot when we were kids, and I said, "Old man, if you try to take a swing at me, I will beat the ever-living shit out of you." Surprisingly, when he got cancer, he really tried hard to make things right and at least apologized for being such a horrible father. Sorry for the wall of text. I've been blessed with a great wife of 30+ years and 2 great kids, and it's difficult to imagine how any man can mistreat his wife and children that way. But make no mistake, you were not the cause of their divorce, nor were you the cause of your father's bad behavior. Thank you, kind sir. I've been with a psychiatrist for 14 years to convince myself of the kind things you said. Thanks.
Sex.